Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be looking at the easiest healers to play in Shadowlands patch 9.1 based on the proposed changes. Now we're not only going to be looking at the easiest healer, but we also look at some of the healers that have possibility of carrying your group based on the utility that they have, and again, we're going to take into consideration the changes that are proposed for 9.1 and how that might impact the rotation both for Mythic Plus and Raiding. You also have to consider that when I'm ranking these healers, I'm looking at Mythic Plus, I'm looking at Raids, I'm also looking at different talent builds and different Covenant builds. For example, Venti Holy Paladin in Mythic Plus situations when approaching a Grievous Mythic Plus affix might be one of the biggest nightmares that you can have. But when you compare Holy Paladin in raid situations, it can be a pretty chill and relaxing time. So when comparing Holy Paladin, I have to decide on a combination score that can be valid for this video. You also have to consider that there's a difference between proactive and reactive healers, and we'll talk about which healer is which and why it is hard. So let's go and get started with the ranking video, and the number one or easiest healer is going to be Holy Priest. And honestly, if you just started watching the video and you just want a nice, chill and relaxing healer both for Mythic Plus, for raids, for KSM level Mythic Plus or really high Mythic Plus keys, Holy Priest is the answer. You can stop watching the video and I'll see you in my next guide. But if you do decide to stay a bit longer and give me more money based on ad revenue, let's go. Flash concentration is still a thing in 9.1, and honestly, there's very few healers that are this dependent on a legendary to make them optimal. Flash concentration, it is as easy as the tooltip says. 5 flash heals to get this buff, and when you have this buff, or when you have 5 stacks of it, just press heal. This comes down to a 2-button rotation, which provides insane HPS in all content. You cannot get any easier than this, guys. Now, I am a little bit over-exaggerating because there is a lot of synergy with this build in terms of talents. For example, when the buff is about to drop off, that might be instant cast because you got free flash heal from Surge of Light talent. Your Trail of Light talent also provides this kind of cleave healing. So it is a simple rotation, but it's only viable or optimal because there's so many different talents and conduits that work behind to make this build so good. So I mentioned conduits. Resonant Words is going to be a conduit that is going to impact your rotation. All of a sudden your Holy Word spells are going to impact or make your single target healing stronger. You're gonna have your Serenity, Sanctify, and don't forget you have Chastise. And Chastise, who has his cooldown reduced when you cast Smite, plus it synergizes with your Surge of Light talent. So all of a sudden, if you have nothing else to do, you are encouraged to contribute some DPS, which in turn is going to increase your healing. There isn't a better candidate for this video than Holy Priest, which honestly is a stark contrast to your Discipline Priest, who's arguably one of the hardest healers to play. So, with this single healer, Priest, you can be chill and relaxed as a Holy Priest, or you can have a really high skill ceiling as a Disc. Take your pick. So at any time a person asks me what is a good beginner's healer, I always recommend them Holy Priest because it provides a good healing fundamentals. It is a reactive type of healer, and honestly, I think people will gravitate towards it. But if they don't want to play a priest, I will tell them to try out a Restoration Shaman. Now, it might be a bit more of a controversial pick because Resto Shaman does have high skill ceiling. A lot of these classes do. But generally speaking, if you do pick up Resto Shaman, it has a good continuous healing. It has a simple or relatively simple rotation both in raids and Mythic Plus, where you're going to be generating your tidal waves by either pressing Riptide or Chain Heal. A lot of the times it's going to be Riptide because Riptide has been buffed and it's very strong. So pressing Riptide or Chain Heal, generating tidal waves, and then using those on your Healing Surge or Healing Wave depending on your mana constraints. Now in Mythic Plus it is relatively simple. The big kind of thinking point is your Cloudburst Totem. Cloudburst is going to make your reactive Resto Shaman into somewhat of a proactive healer. So you might be placing Cloudburst even before damage has occurred because your healing, including overhealing, or at least a portion of that, is going to be placed into this totem, which then can be activated early in order to do a bunch of healing. And especially in raid situations, this can be somewhat difficult if you opt into this different talent build. And this is where the different talent builds come into play. For example, if you play Primordial Wave, if you play Unleash Life, you're gonna have a window of burst healing. So you place your Cloudburst Totem, you make sure you have a lot of Riptides out there, you press your Primordial Wave, then you might press your Unleash Life, and then into Healing Wave. All of the healing waves are going to be impacted by your Unleash Life, and then you can follow it up with something like Wellsprings, which might give you like insanely big Cloudburst. And if you're lucky with something like Tumbling Wave resets and you get more Primordial Waves, you can be looking at something like 80k plus Cloudburst in raid situations. My record is, by the way, 100k. Let me know if you've seen bigger cloudbursts than that. So you can see Resto Shaman can actually be quite difficult, but the reason I'm placing it here is because a lot of people might not want to play Unleash Life and they go with Torrents. All of a sudden the playstyle is a little easier. A lot of times Resto Shaman, it is a reactive healer, so if you see someone taking damage, you heal them. Resto Shaman technically does not have a lot of mana issues, and if you follow the basic rotation, honestly, you probably won't even need to use a mana potion. You might even use an intellect potion for extra healing or DPS. Shaman can also be regarded as one of the lowest APM or action per minute healers, meaning that if you enjoy a more easygoing kind of gameplay where you have these long casts, Shaman could be a healer for you. And the potential to carry as Resto Shaman is insanely high because you have continuously good healing with an interrupt. Interrupt is so good in Mythic Plus, where you can actually carry your whole group. And in terms of 9.1 changes, Resto Shaman didn't receive any, with the exception of possibly getting a new Covenant because of some Covenant specific legendaries, like for example the Kirin one was looking very strong, but it did receive a stealth nerf in terms of healing very recently. So it's very likely that Resto Shamans in terms of Covenant choices are going to revert to similar choices that you had in 9.05. Maybe Kirin Legendary making a comeback if you're looking for pure DPS. So now let's go to our next healer, and that is going to be Holy Paladin. And honestly, I know a lot of people here who main Holy Paladin, they will say that Holy Paladin is really not that difficult, and I probably could have placed it as the second healer. And I probably would agree with you, because I do feel that Holy Paladin, especially if you play Kirin in something like Mythic Plus environment, it is really a relatively simple healer, and in 9.1 it's not looking to change too much. Now if you play a Holy Paladin who's Vent tier and you might approach raiding situations, there is a lot of talk about Marad's Dying Breath Legendary making a comeback. There's also a lot of talk about using a different talent from Crusader's Might based on your first row talent, so there is a chance that Holy Paladin, especially Vent-tier Holy Paladin, might have a bit of a gameplay change, but it is not going to be a difficult rotation. Now keep in mind, a lot of this is speculation and anything can change. There is a very likelihood that you could go back to a similar playstyle that you had in 9.05, but it's fun to kind of look at possible new builds emerging. But I'm still very certain Holy Paladin is going to be very chill in raiding situations. Now, if you do approach Holy Paladin in Mythic Plus and all of a sudden you decide to play Vent tier, you know that one of the hardest healers, or at least in my opinion, one of the hardest healers in Mythic Plus is Vent tier Holy Paladin. It is one of those type of healers that completely relies on your group. So your continuous healing throughput with Vent tier Holy Paladin is relatively low. Where you get your majority of healing and damage is when you use your cooldowns, and your cooldowns are relatively long. So what happens if someone messes up or there is unexpected damage? You're kind of reliant on your other group party members to use their defensives, use their externals, possibly even off heal. So this is why I feel playing a Vent tier Holy Paladin is one of the most taxing things you can do in Mythic Plus situations, and this is why it was really hard for me to rank Holy Paladin, because on one end, it is quite easy in raids, but really taxing in Mythic Plus, depending on which Covenant you go. So this is why I placed Holy Paladin here. And now the next two healers, honestly, I could not think of where to put them, so I placed them in the same position, and that is Restoration Druid and Mistweaver Monk. And I want to talk about Resto Druid first. Now, Resto Druid is the first healer that is going to be regarded as a proactive healer. So that means that if you want to have optimal healing setup, you need to start healing before damage comes out, especially in raid situations. By default, being proactive healer is always going to be harder than being a reactive healer. Reactive healer sees damage and it heals. Proactive healer needs to know how the boss is going to turn out, where is the damage coming from, and when there is going to be a need for a big cooldown. Some people might be a little bit ignorant and then they say, hey, why'd you place Resto Druid here? You just press rejuve all the time. If you do that in raids, you will run out of mana. You do have to micromanage a bunch of cooldowns as a Resto Druid in raiding situations, including Tree of Life, including Flourish, including Tranquility. And Flourish can actually extend your Tranquility, so you do have to decide before approaching a boss, do I want to extend Tranquility and combine Tranquility with Flourish, or do I want to separate them? How am I going to approach a fight? Maybe I want to use Tree of Life to preserve my mana as a mana kind of cooldown or throughput cooldown, because hey, Tree of Life affects your rejuve and wild growth in different ways. And honestly, Resto Druid in Mythic Plus can be one of the easiest healers or pretty hard one depending on how much effort you want to put into it. You have different rotations for DPS. If you want to play Balance Affinity, you can have a Balance Affinity DPS rotation. If you want to play Feral Affinity, you can have a kitty DPS rotation. So all of a sudden, it really depends how much effort and time you want to put into your Resto Druid. A lot of new Resto Druids end up overhealing so much, and they just focus on healing and placing their HOTS on everybody. While an experienced Resto Druid will know when they can go into DPS, when they can let their HOTS do the work, even if someone's 50% HP, but they have all those rejuves, they have Spring Blossoms, they have your Wild Growth HOT, I can go and DPS. I don't have to get them to full HP. And honestly, to do that, you need experience and a lot of time with Resto Druid. So now let's go to the Mistweaver boy. And honestly, I should have mentioned that, hey, Resto Druid received no changes in 9.1, while Mistweaver is receiving some substantial buffs that might impact the rotation a little bit in terms of how you're going to be pressing your revival. The reason I'm ranking Mistweaver Monk quite high in terms of healer difficulty is because I'm basing it on fist weaving. Now, there is two different playstyles for Mistweaver. You can be a range kind of healer, or you can be fist weaving. And there is a direct advantages that are happening in 9.1 towards fist weaving. Mistweavers are getting buffs to their DPS abilities, which in turn is also increasing their ancient teachings of the monastery legendary, which in turn is increasing rising mist value, which in turn makes you go into melee and be pressing boom boom abilities. There is a lot of kind of synergy between their DPS abilities that is going to increase your healing, because fist weaving has a really nice synergy, and in my opinion, it feels a lot nicer than a Holy Paladin melee playstyle does. I should have mentioned that Mistweaver, and including Holy Paladin, their difficulty rises just by being melee healers, because especially in Mythic Plus content where you have to be in melee, you have to avoid a lot of frontal abilities, you have to avoid Mythic Plus affixes like Storming, which have been nerfed, but still. There's a lot of disadvantages to being a melee, and if you're a melee healer that relies on hitting mobs in order to heal, it can be regarded as a little bit more difficult. It is also interesting to note that if you do decide to play Mistweaver Monk in Mythic Plus or race situations, decide to take the Red Crane talent, you'll have to worry about optimal rotation in order to generate stacks that are going to give you faster and cheaper enveloping mists, and also have to optimize enveloping breath spreading by casting those enveloping mists while maintaining an optimal melee rotation. And in 9.1, revival is going to scale with mastery, so you might want to make sure before pressing revival that you maybe use your essence font, so it's going to double proc your mastery. Possibly use different combination of abilities if you're Kyrian or, for example, Necrolord with Bone to Brew. So your revival button requires kind of a setup time. And I do feel good with this evaluation of a Mistweaver Monk. I do consider Mistweaver to be a very solid or a good throughput healer. Their single target is very easy to achieve. It doesn't have a cooldown on it in terms of Soothing Mist, Enveloping Mist, and Vivify. But at the same time, the community perception is pretty bad, so getting into groups can be also pretty hard. So let's go and move on to our next healer, and that is Discipline Priest. Now, there's no surprise Discipline Priest has been ranked as one of the hardest healers in the game. I've ranked Discipline Priest as one of the hardest, probably for as long as I've been doing YouTube, because Discipline is the essential proactive healer. If you don't know the damaging ability timers or when the boss is gonna use certain AoE abilities, you cannot play Discipline Priest in raid situations. Spirit Shell has been the meta for a really long time in terms of Shadowlands, and you literally need to know the exact timings, and you have the scientific rotation that at the start feels really kind of hard, but is simplified after you get the muscle memory down. And what's happening in 9.1, there is the possibility of a completely new build for Discipline Priest in terms of Kyrian, Boon of Descended. Now you have the ability of lowering Boon of Descended, which is a 3-minute cooldown, to 1 minute if you use Kyrian specific legendary and Mechanical Soulbind trait. This might be very popular in Mythic Plus situations where you can hit multiple enemies, and again, you have to hit multiple enemies with Ascended Nova to get a good cooldown reduction from it. And if you play it properly, you'll get some really nice cooldown reduction on this ability, which in turn is going to give you damage, which in turn is going to give you Atonement Transfer, because Ascended Eruption does a lot of healing and damage at the end. This might be a little bit different in raid situations. People are still kind of discovering if you're gonna use the same kind of combination. Maybe you're gonna use different legendaries, but Kyrian is definitely something that is very popular at this given point. And if you do end up using Kyrian in both raids and Mythic Plus, you'll notice that, oh hey, you have such weird interaction with your Ascended Blast, which gives you 5 stacks, and Ascended Nova gives you 1 based on how many targets you hit. So if you're now in melee range, you might have to use different filler abilities instead of Ascended Nova. Ascended Nova and Ascended Blast both have 1 second GCDs, which means that if you have a ton of haste or haste proc, you might not be able to fit into Ascended Novas, and you might have to fit in something else. So you can see where I'm going with this. This is an ability that the rotation is going to change based on procs, that the rotation is going to change based on whether you're in melee or ranged. If you want to play Discipline Priest, you better do some research before approaching raiding bosses. You better do some practice in terms of rotation. I'm sure over time it's going to become easier and easier, but at this early point in Shadowlands, in terms of patch 9.1, there's a lot of unknowns, and honestly, I think people are going to be panicking in terms of learning the new rotation. So if you like this challenge, play Discipline Priest, but if you don't want to go through all this hassle, you honestly can go and opt in into Holy Priest, who is arguably one of the easiest healers to play in the game and gives you really good throughput. Priest provides you with a really chill healer in terms of Holy Priest, and one of the hardest high skill ceiling healers out there with Discipline Priest. Take your pick. So this has been my video in terms of easiest healers, and honestly healers that can really carry your group based on how much time investment you're going to give them. And I honestly feel this list has a lot of open interpretation based on other people's experiences. Like for example, maybe people will consider Holy Paladin easier, maybe people will consider Resto Druid easier. It is really based on person's experiences in Mythic Plus and raids. This is based on my opinions and my experiences playing all of the healers in raids and Mythic Plus and mainly poke situations. So I think the list would change in a lot of organized groups, and I don't think there is a healer that is so hard that you should stay away from them, because I consider every healer to be extremely fun and valuable, and honestly it takes a long time to master any of these healers that I mentioned here, because you can start off with them and have a really good time from the very beginning, but in order to play them to the max, it takes time. So guys, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and thank you for watching this guide, and I'll see you next time.